yoga mat because today we are talking about energy balance. What are the two components to energy balance? So energy balance basically means you are in homeostasis. So you're not gaining weight, you're not losing weight, you are in a stable weight status. And energy balance happens because the energy that's input into your system equals the energy that is outputted from your system. So there's two sides to this energy balance equation. There's the input and there's the output. So the input is what we eat. Input is food. The food that we eat is the input side of this equation. And the output side of this equation has three main parts. The three main parts are 1, the physical activity that you do every day. 2, the thermic effect of food, which is the energy it takes us to digest our food. And 3, the biggest part of this equation is the basal metabolic rate. So that is the energy it takes you just to breathe, to beat your heart, to just sit around and let your body do those things it has to do. So physical activity, thermic effect of food, basal metabolic rate, the three components of the energy output side of this equation. Which of the three outputs do you have the most control over? Well, your thermic effect of food, you really don't have any control over how many calories it takes your body to digest the type of food you eat. Then you have your basal metabolic rate. You can adjust that, but it's very difficult to do so and mostly out of your control. And then that leaves us with physical activity. So physical activity is the part of the energy out equation that you can adjust the most because you can do more physical activity one day, you can do less physical activity. So physical activity is the part of the energy out you have the most control over. So physical activity you have the most control over on the energy outside of the equation, but your basal metabolic rate can change. You just don't have as much control over what's changing it. So some things that will change your basal metabolic rate include your age. As you age, your basal metabolic rate gets lower because as you age, you tend to lose lean body mass. If you maintain physical fitness, you can kind of temper this decrease of your basal metabolic rate, but your basal metabolic rate does decrease while you age. And for women, that especially happens after menopause. So that is why, like in the dietary guidelines, when they give calorie levels by age, the calorie levels tend to decrease as you age. The calories that you need every day decrease as you age, and that's because your basal metabolic rate is decreasing. If you're taller, you have a higher basal metabolic rate because people with more surface area have a higher basal metabolic rate. So that's something like we can't control at all, obviously. If you are in an extreme temperature, your basal metabolic rate will raise. So if you're really hot or really cold, you're trying to adjust to that, your basal metabolic rate will raise. If you're growing, your basal metabolic rate is going to increase. You're increasing your surface area, you are doing a lot of work, and this applies to pregnant women as well because you're growing too. Other things that raise your basal metabolic rate, lean body mass. So if you are training at the gym and you gain lean body mass, that will increase your basal metabolic rate. That's probably the one component of basal metabolic rate that we have the most control over. So when people talk about changing their metabolism, going to the gym and gaining lean body mass is one way you can do that. Other things that impact your basal metabolic rate negatively, starvation, fasting will lower your basal metabolic rate because your body's trying to hang on to all the calories that it has when you're in a state of starvation. So when people have eating disorders or they're not eating enough, they can actually decrease their basal metabolic rate, which often does not help them achieve the goal that they have, which is usually to lose weight if you're trying to restrict your calories. So if you're really restricting your calories, your body's gonna fight that by lowering your basal metabolic rate, and you will burn less calories at rest than you did when you were fully feeding yourself. Bodies are so fun. And then if you're stressed, your basal metabolic rate will oftentimes increase, but in states of chronic stress, that may not be the case. So when I'm talking about stress, I'm talking about like a stressful event that you have to respond to in the moment, not necessarily our 21st century really chronically stressed lives. thyroxine hormone, thyroid hormone, has an impact on basal metabolic rate. So the more thyroid hormone you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate will be. If you have hypothyroidism or a low level of thyroid hormone, you will have a lower basal metabolic rate, and people usually identify that they have this issue because they'll be gaining weight without knowing that they're gaining weight, or on the opposite, have too much thyroid hormone, they will lose weight without realizing why they're losing weight. So thyroid hormone is integrally involved in basal metabolic rate as well. All right, we're in the decimated garden. Frost got it. Because I thought like it was a great wasteland to talk about energy deficit. So the garden does no longer have enough energy or support. I mean, the carrots are doing okay, but other than that, as it was like a jungle in the earlier videos, it's in an energy deficit. And when your body's in an energy deficit, it means that you don't have enough calories going in compared to the calories that are coming out. So you're not eating enough to fuel all of the output that your body has to do. So if you maintain this energy deficit over a period of time, you will begin to lose weight. Now, your body will try to fight this by lowering your basal metabolic rate, so lowering the number of calories it needs every day, but you will generally lose weight at least up until a point, and if you maintain energy deficit over time, you will continue to lose weight. So, how does your body deal in this fasting kind of energy deficit state? Well, one thing is that it will use ketones as energy. If you're not giving enough carbohydrate and protein, it's going to start using fat as energy, and that is in the form of ketone bodies. Ketone bodies are, fragments of fat plus a little bit of amino acid input to form the ketone body. But they are used so that you're not breaking down your bodily proteins to form carbohydrate. So when you're in a starving state or a fasting state, you're going to use ketone bodies to prevent your body from breaking down bodily proteins, muscular proteins to have energy. So ketone bodies will be used. After 10 days of fasting, your body will mostly be able to use ketone bodies. So the brain will even have adjusted and be using mostly ketone bodies. So this is why when people are on like the keto diet, oh my God, I just forgot the name. Actually, I'm kind of proud. The keto diet, when they're on that, they can be like fanatical about maintaining ketosis, because if you maintain ketosis for long enough, your body will adjust to it and you'll start to feel better. You won't feel like you have the flu anymore. So that's why people can be kind of fanatical about that. But that's what your body's doing when you're in energy deficit. You're going to use ketone bodies for energy. Let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of fasting. And you can imagine that talking about the pros of not eating is difficult for me, but I'm going to try to be evidence-based, non-biased. So, pros of fasting. Well, there is a scheme of fasting called intermittent fasting, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And this means that of course, with diet culture, there's a million ways to do it because everyone's trying to sell you something. There's a lot of ways to do it. So you could eat for 5 days and then like eat 500 calories for 2 days. You could eat for like a week and then not for another week. There's a lot of different ways, but the most popular way is like you eat for 8 hours of the day and then you don't eat for the rest. Now there's 24 hours in the day, so if you're eating for 8 of them, then you're not eating for 16 of them. Math. And what this would look like is like you eat from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Change it however you want. But people who subscribe to this say that it's like the cure for their weight problems, their diabetes problems, their heart problems, their life problems, their happiness problems, everything. People that adhere to this are really into it. And there's been a lot of scientific study on intermittent fasting. So in rats, we see that intermittent fasting tends to reduce chronic disease, extend life, increase cognition, etc. But that's in rats. So in human studies, they're also showing some benefits of intermittent fasting for some people. So it does seem that intermittent fasting will help you lose weight, but not necessarily better than any other diet. So if you'd rather do another diet, then you could have the same results. or if you'd like to do no diet, then you could be happier. But there are potentially some health benefits to humans from intermittent fasting if you're able to stick with the program, but it's pretty hard to have a life when you only eat from 7 to 3. Like, what are you supposed to do when your friend asks you out to dinner? No, have water? Okay, fine, Heather from Selling Sunset, drink your water for dinner. But the rest of us might want to be involved in social interactions with our friends. For intermittent fasting is like, it's not going to cleanse you. Your metabolism will slow with intermittent fasting potentially, because as I said, like, your body doesn't like to be in a starving state, so it's going to fight that. Your body is harmed if it doesn't have enough energy to make red blood cells, enzymes, all of that. So you need to eat enough that it can still do all of that. Then you can have acid-base balance getting out of whack when you're eating not in a consistent style. And then finally, you can definitely have compensatory binging when you're in intermittent fasting. Why we have to come up with all of these schemes to keep ourselves from eating, like, guys, it just makes me so frustrated. I will link to some studies that have looked at intermittent fasting in the YouTube description below so that you can find them if you are interested in this way of eating, or if you're just interested in learning more about the evidence behind it. All right, y'all, now we're going to talk about energy excess, because I've switched settings to this beautiful fallscape that kind of demonstrates the bountiful conditions you'll be in if you're in energy excess. So energy excess means that you're eating more than you're expending. So if you maintain an energy excess over time, you keep eating more than your body, eating more calories than your body's burning, you will start to gain weight eventually over time. So that's what happens with energy excess. But what's happening with the different nutrients? Well, carbohydrates are getting stored as glycogen and then fat. Once your glycogen stores are full in your muscle and your liver, the carbohydrate excess gets stored as fat. The excess protein is going to get converted to glucose and then stored either as glycogen or probably fat. So protein, remember, protein can get stored as fat. And then fat is going to be stored as fat. So we're going to just store all the nutrients that we take in excess, and that's going to eventually help us to gain weight if we are storing excess nutrients as fat. And also alcohol is going to be stored as fat. Remember, alcohol has like a straight pathway to being stored as fat, and then it also slows down the use of fat stores as energy. So alcohol is like, if you're trying to burn your own energy, alcohol is not helping with that. Alcohol is getting stored as fat, and then it's impeding us from using the energy that we had already stored as fat. I want to show you visually what happens in a feasting or a fasting state with all of the macronutrients. How do we get energy from carbohydrate, fat, and protein in a feasting state? This means a fed state, we've just eaten. So with carbohydrate, you're going to break down carbohydrate containing foods, you'll get glucose from them. With fat containing foods, you'll break down the triglycerides into fatty acids. And with protein containing foods, you'll break down the protein into amino acids. Then what happens? With glucose, you're going to store that glucose as glycogen in your muscle and your liver. You can also store glucose as fat. If you have already filled up your muscle and liver glycogen stores, you'll store the rest of the glucose as fat. Fatty acids you're going to store as fat. And then with amino acids, you'll also store them as fat through a series of conversions. You also get rid of the nitrogen in amino acids. Through your kidneys, you excrete the nitrogen. So in a fasting state, when we need to get energy from our stores, with muscle and liver glycogen, we break down that glycogen back into glucose, and with those glucose molecules, we can then get energy. With fat, we're going to take fatty acids from our fat cells, so we get the fatty acids, and then in a short fast, like if you've just not eaten for a few hours, you might just take energy from the fatty acids, but in a longer fast, you're going to use ketone bodies because you really deplete To get energy from fatty acids, you need to have some carbohydrate around. If you're in a long fast and you don't have carbohydrate around, you're going to form ketone bodies, and ketone bodies will also provide a source of energy. Also in a fasting state, we use our body proteins to provide energy. So to do that, we'll break down body proteins into amino acids. Then the amino acids can either be converted into glucose through a series of conversions. You get rid of the nitrogen and then you convert to glucose, or they can be converted to ketone bodies, which will also give you energy. So these are all the conversions between glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, where they're stored, how we use that stored form of energy. And if you take it arrow by arrow, I think it makes sense. But basically we can store all of our macronutrients and then we can use them for energy when we are in a fasting state. When we're talking about energy deficit or energy excess, how you get in one or the other is based on your energy in and your energy out. But we haven't talked that much about the energy in input and like how we decide how much to eat. And one big factor in that is our appetite control. And so I want to introduce 3 terms that actually have definitions that are related to appetite control. So the first one is hunger. So when we're feeling hungry, we generally want to eat. So hunger is defined as the physiological need for food. So you actually haven't eaten in a while, your body absolutely needs energy and food, and that is hunger. You start feeling hungry, and there are various hunger signals that we'll talk about in a minute. So that's hunger. And then we have satiety. So if you ate and you ate to the point where you were satisfied, you might be experiencing satiety. And so satiety is the perception of fullness that lingers in the hours after a meal or perhaps a large snack, and it will linger until you feel hunger before the next mealtime. So satiety is that perception of fullness. You feel satisfied. Satiety, satisfied, go together, yeah. So hunger, physiological need for food. Satiety, feel full. And then we have appetite, and appetite is actually the psychological need for food. So appetite can happen without hunger. What does that mean or look like? So appetite, psychological need for food. It just means that you want food, but you're not actually that hungry. You may have just eaten even. So for example, we might want to eat more after we finish a meal. Maybe we want something sweet, maybe we want dessert, but we're not actually hungry anymore, but we'd still like some ice cream. So that is appetite at work. It's like, I would like this, but your body's like, oh, sure, but I'm not hungry. So you can have appetite without hunger. You can have hunger without appetite, where you actually need to eat, but you don't feel like eating. Maybe you're really stressed. Maybe your stomach feels a little bit off. Maybe you don't have any food that you're really interested in. So that would be an example of having hunger, but not appetite. You of course can have hunger and appetite, where you want to eat and your body's telling you, please eat. And then you can not have hunger and you can not have appetite. So that one might be when you're feeling satiety. Brought it all together. So we need to think about how we have inputs on how we feel hungry, how we feel satisfied, and how we have an appetite, because those things are going to control how much goes into our mouth from all the food that we have to make us have the energy input side of the energy balance equation. We have factors that will increase our hunger and our appetite, and also factors that will increase our satiety. For hunger and appetite, stomach contractions will help alert us that we're hungry. There's also other signs that you're hungry, like you might get a headache, or you might feel hangry, which is hunger and anger. You might feel lightheaded, you might feel tired. So all of these signs can be signals that you're hungry. We also have a hormone called ghrelin, which is released by the stomach. It goes to the hypothalamus in your brain, and it alerts your hypothalamus and your brain that you're hungry. And I can remember ghrelin because ghrelin growl, like your stomach growls. So ghrelin will signal that you're hungry. And then we have a bunch of factors that influence our appetite specifically. So remember, appetite is a psychological want for food.
And so cultural, social factors, like if you're out for dinner or your family's having a big meal that's really important to you. Hormones can influence our appetite, specifically sex hormones. This is especially true for women whose sex hormones cycle throughout the month. So that can increase and decrease our appetite. Weather, when we're hot or cold, we might crave different types of food or food at all. And then we all have our own individual taste preferences, things we like to eat and that we eat when they're available, even if perhaps we're not hungry. So all of those things influence our hunger and our appetite. And then we have factors that increase our satiety, or feelings of fullness. So when we're eating a meal, our sensations of pleasure will decrease the more we eat. So the taste pleasure, the texture pleasure. After the first few bites, those sensations tend to decrease. We also have nerve stretch receptors in our stomach that will signal to our brain that our stomach is filling up. And then when nutrients enter the small intestine, that triggers hormones that signal to the brain that there's nutrients in the small intestine, you're getting full. The brain can also release neurotransmitters, which suppress food intake, and it's triggered to do this because of nutrients in their bloodstream. So when your bloodstream has nutrients, the brain will suppress food intake. There's also a hormone called leptin, which is produced by fat cells and signals the brain that you are full. So when we have a lot of leptin, we have lower appetites. When we don't have a lot of leptin, we have a very high appetite. When you're dieting, it's thought that you produce less leptin, so then you are more hungry, which is not helpful if you're trying to diet. And then certain nutrients can have an impact on our satiety. Protein, some studies have shown, makes us feel more full, and then fiber may also help us to feel full because it maintains our blood glucose. When blood glucose drops, the brain gets a signal that we need to eat. So if fiber is helping us to maintain our blood glucose, that can perhaps contribute to satiety. Personally, I never feel a difference no matter what the macronutrient intake of my snacks and meals is. So I can't speak to that personally, and the research is mixed, but potentially certain macronutrients can help us feel more satiated.
All right, guys, this was our overview on energy balance. I hope that you just recognize what energy balance is, what happens when we're in energy excess or energy deficit. And remember, we come to this without judgment. So we're not saying that being in energy excess is good or energy deficit is bad or vice versa. We're just like, these are the facts about how our body operates in these states. And that's kind of what I want you to take from it. Same with appetite control, hunger control. It's not good or bad to have different control mechanisms. It just is. And when we know how our body reacts to hunger or fullness, we are better prepared to honor those signals and have a really nice, healthy relationship with food.